In the early hours of May 2026, the world held its breath as unverified reports flooded social media, claiming Iran had unleashed a staggering barrage of over 5,200 Emad ballistic missiles, striking the heart of Israel's Nahal Brigade command and inflicting damage estimated at $310.7 billion. The images and numbers spread like wildfire, headlines screaming that Israel had been stunned badly. But here's what's really happening beneath the noise. The 2026 Iran war has already rewritten the rules of modern missile warfare, exposing both the terrifying potential and the brutal limitations of saturation strikes in an era of advanced defenses. What actually occurred in the latest exchanges? How much of Iran's arsenal remains intact after months of intense combat? And what does this latest chapter reveal about the fragile balance of power across the Middle East? Today we're going deep into the missile dimension of this conflict, separating verified events from sensational claims, to understand why the world's most critical choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, remains on a knife edge, and why the next few weeks could reshape global energy security for a generation. Pay close attention, because this isn't just about one barrage. It's about a new era of strategic deterrence that's being tested in real time. To truly grasp the significance of what unfolded in early May 2026, we must first understand the broader arc of this conflict and the missile capabilities that define it. The war ignited on February 28th when coordinated U.S.-Israeli strikes hit critical Iranian facilities. Iran's retaliation came in multiple waves over the following weeks. Hundreds of ballistic missiles, including Emad variants, launched in carefully orchestrated salvos alongside drones and cruise missiles. Let's break this down. The Emad is no ordinary weapon. An evolution of the older Shahab 3, it features a maneuverable re-entry vehicle that improves accuracy and complicates interception. With a range exceeding 1,700 kilometers, it was designed precisely for scenarios like this, reaching deep into Israeli territory from Iranian soil. Before the conflict, Iran's arsenal was estimated in the thousands, dispersed across hardened underground sites to survive preemptive attacks. Israel, for its part, relied on a multi-layered air and missile defense system: the high-altitude Arrow for long-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range, and Iron Dome for shorter-range rockets. American forces provided critical intelligence, naval support, and even direct interceptor assistance from the region. Despite these defenses, the sheer volume of Iranian launches in March and April tested the system like never before. Interception rates remained high overall, yet enough missiles got through to cause real damage to military infrastructure, air bases, and economic targets. By early April, a fragile ceasefire took hold. Iran, having expended a significant portion of its ready arsenal, shifted focus to reconstituting buried stocks and production lines. Israel, while bloodied, maintained operational superiority in the air and continued monitoring the region's most volatile flashpoints. As of May 3, 2026, that ceasefire remains intact on paper, but tensions are rising again. Iranian officials have signaled they still possess the capacity for large-scale strikes, while the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly one-fifth of global oil passes, stays under constant watch. This is the real backdrop against which those dramatic May claims must be judged. Not the fantasy of a single 5,200 missile barrage, but the hard reality of a depleted yet dangerous Iranian missile force facing one of the world's most advanced defenses in a conflict that has already redrawn the strategic map of the Middle East. Let's examine the sequence of events that has brought us to this tense moment in early May 2026. The missile phase of the 2026 conflict unfolded in four major Iranian barrages between late February and early April. The first wave, launched on March 1st, involved approximately 320 ballistic missiles, including several dozen Emad variants. Israeli and American systems intercepted over 85%, yet a handful penetrated to strike airbase infrastructure in the Negev and northern Israel. Damage was real but contained, runways repaired within days. Subsequent waves grew more sophisticated but smaller in scale. By mid-March, Iran shifted to mixed salvos of Emad, Ghadr, and cluster munition-equipped missiles, aiming to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers and decoys. The largest single-day launch recorded by Western intelligence reached around 180 missiles on March 22nd. Again, interception rates held above 80% thanks to rapid U.S. naval resupply of Arrow interceptors and real-time satellite queuing. April brought a noticeable decline in Iranian launch frequency. After the April 7 ceasefire announcement, verified strikes dropped sharply. Iranian officials publicly claimed they were preserving remaining assets for decisive response if the truce collapsed. Independent analysis from the Institute for the Study of War and open-source satellite imagery confirmed that Iran had dispersed and buried hundreds of launchers across its western provinces, but production lines had been severely degraded by earlier coalition strikes. Now, regarding the specific claims that circulated on May 1st and 2nd, social media and certain outlets reported a single, unprecedented barrage of 5,200 Emad missiles targeting the Nahal Brigade command center, with alleged damage reaching $310.7 billion. These figures have not been corroborated by any Israeli, American, or independent international source. Satellite data available as of May 3rd shows no evidence of the kind of massive launch signatures or nationwide impact craters such a salvo would produce. Israeli military briefings described increased Iranian missile movements, but confirmed no saturation attack on that scale occurred. What did happen instead was a more limited series of probing launches and heightened activity around Iranian underground facilities, consistent with reconstitution efforts rather than all-out assault. The Nahal Brigade, operating primarily in support of northern border security, reported no direct command center strike. Economic damage estimates for the entire missile exchange phase of the war remain in the low tens of billions, not hundreds. This gap between viral claims and verified reality is itself a key development. It highlights how information warfare now runs parallel to kinetic operations, shaping global perceptions even as the actual battlefield remains far more constrained. Here's what's really happening beneath the headlines and the viral numbers. The mathematics of saturation attacks reveal why the claimed 5,200 missile barrage remains logistically and arithmetically implausible, even at the height of Iran's pre-war arsenal. Each Emad missile costs Iran roughly $1 to $2 million to produce and launch. A single coordinated salvo of that scale would consume the equivalent of Iran's entire remaining strategic reserve after 4 months of sustained combat and coalition degradation strikes. Independent assessments from the International Institute for Strategic Studies and open-source satellite monitoring confirm that by early April, Iran had already expended between 60 and 70% of its long-range ballistic inventory. Reconstitution under the ceasefire has been slow and partial, limited to moving buried transporter erector launchers and limited production restarts. Firing thousands in one night would require perfect synchronization across dozens of dispersed sites, something no open-source evidence or Western intelligence has detected. The hidden fact here is the brutal economics of modern missile defense. Israel's Arrow 3 interceptors cost approximately $2 to $4 million each, yet the real advantage lies in layered efficiency and American resupply. During the March waves, the United States quietly surged naval assets into the eastern Mediterranean and Persian Gulf, providing both additional interceptors and real-time targeting data that boosted overall success rates above 80%. This partnership turned what could have been a decisive saturation attempt into a manageable, albeit expensive, defensive operation. Iran's strategy, quantity, decoys, and maneuverable re-entry vehicles, was designed precisely to exhaust those expensive interceptors. It partially succeeded in forcing Israel to burn through stocks faster than anticipated, but not fast enough to collapse the shield. Another layer rarely discussed, the role of Iran's proxy network in complicating the defensive picture. While the direct Emad launches were the headline threat, Hezbollah and Houthi operations in parallel created multi-axis pressure that stretched Israeli and American resources. This distributed approach is part of Tehran's deeper doctrine, not a single knockout blow, but sustained attrition that raises the political and economic cost of continued confrontation. The gap between claimed and verified damage tells its own story. Cumulative economic impact across the entire missile phase of the war sits in the low tens of billions of dollars, significant for targeted infrastructure and lost productivity, but far from the $310 billion figure circulating online. The real hidden cost lies elsewhere. Temporary disruption of Israeli air operations, accelerated depletion of high-end munitions, and a subtle erosion in the perceived invulnerability of advanced missile defenses. For Israel, this has forced a quiet reevaluation of qualitative military edge in an era where quantity can challenge quality. For the United States, it underscores the limits of extended deterrence when an adversary is willing to absorb massive punishment to impose even modest costs. Pay close attention to this. What we are witnessing is not the collapse of one side's defenses, but the emergence of a new equilibrium in missile warfare, one where even partial penetrations carry outsized strategic weight because they expose the fragility of high-tech shields against determined, dispersed salvos. What this actually means is that the missile exchanges, even in their more limited, verified form, have triggered consequences far beyond the battlefield, reshaping the global energy map in ways we haven't seen since the 1970s oil shocks. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point through which nearly one-fifth of the world's seaborne oil and a significant share of liquefied natural gas once flowed, has been under severe pressure since the opening days of the conflict. Iranian threats, mining operations, and direct attacks on shipping, met by a US-led naval response, have slashed daily transits by more than 90%. Oil prices surged past $100 per barrel in March and have remained volatile, sending shockwaves through every major economy. What this reveals is the enduring power of asymmetric control over critical maritime arteries. A single actor's ability to threaten a choke point can impose costs measured in trillions when sustained over weeks. Allies and partners across the Gulf have been drawn deeper into the vortex. U.S. forward bases from Qatar to the UAE have absorbed real damage from Iranian strikes, forcing Washington to surge additional naval and air assets into the region, even under the fragile April ceasefire. This has strained extended deterrence commitments and highlighted the high price of maintaining presence in a theater where every missile salvo tests the limits of Allied logistics. The hidden implication here is strategic learning on a global scale. Nations watching from afar, particularly China and Russia, are studying the mathematics of saturation attacks against advanced multi-layered defenses. The ability of even a partially degraded Iranian arsenal to force expensive interceptor expenditure and create temporary windows of vulnerability is being noted in Beijing and Moscow. This changes the calculus for future great power competition, where precision-guided quantity may increasingly challenge technological superiority. Beyond energy and military posture, the ripple effects touch global supply chains. Fertilizer shipments, petrochemicals, and LNG flows have all been disrupted, driving up costs for food production and industrial activity from Europe to Asia. What was once a contained regional confrontation has become a stress test for the entire architecture of international energy security and maritime trade. Pay close attention to this. The 2026 conflict has demonstrated that, in an interconnected world, no missile barrage, however constrained, remains purely local. The economic and strategic aftershocks are already rewriting assumptions about deterrence, choke point vulnerability, and the true cost of escalation in the world's most vital energy corridor. Let's look ahead. With the fragile April ceasefire now entering its fourth week as of May 3, 2026, the real question is no longer what has already happened, but what the next escalation threshold will look like, and whether anyone still has the will or the capacity to cross it. Iran's immediate priority is reconstitution. Satellite imagery and Western intelligence indicate Tehran is methodically moving remaining buried launchers and attempting limited restarts of solid fuel production lines. Estimates suggest it will take between 6 and 9 months to restore even 50% of its pre-war long-range ballistic inventory. That timeline gives both sides a narrow window. Iranian commanders have already signaled that any renewed Israeli or American strikes on these reconstitution sites would be treated as a direct breach, a tripwire that could trigger another round of missile salvos, though on a smaller, more targeted scale than the March peaks. On the Israeli side, the posture remains one of high alert deterrence. Having absorbed real but manageable losses in the earlier exchanges, Jerusalem is focused on two tracks: rapid replenishment of Arrow and David's Sling interceptors through accelerated U.S. deliveries, and quiet diplomatic pressure to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. Any visible Iranian move toward closing or mining the strait would almost certainly draw an immediate U.S.-led naval response, turning the economic pressure back on Tehran far faster than another missile barrage could. The hidden risk lies in miscalculation around proxies. Hezbollah and the Houthis have largely observed the ceasefire, but both retain significant rocket and missile stocks. A single successful strike on Israeli territory traced back to Iranian-supplied systems could collapse the truce overnight. At the same time, back-channel talks, mediated quietly through Oman and Qatar, are exploring limited confidence-building measures. Temporary restrictions on Iranian missile movements in exchange for eased sanctions on non-military oil exports. The most probable near-term trajectory, based on current indicators, is a tense, uneasy standoff lasting through the summer. Neither side appears eager for a return to full-scale missile warfare, yet both retain the technical means to reignite it within hours. The real danger is not a deliberate all-out assault, but an incident in the Gulf that spirals. A tanker attack, a misread radar contact, or a proxy overreach. Should that happen, the next barrage would likely be smaller, smarter, and aimed squarely at economic targets, refineries, ports, and energy infrastructure, rather than a futile attempt at military saturation. This changes everything for the region's security architecture. The 2026 conflict has proven that ballistic missiles remain a potent tool of coercion even against the most advanced defenses, but they come at an enormous price. The coming weeks will determine whether that lesson leads to genuine de-escalation or simply a more dangerous, better calibrated arms race in the Middle East. The 2026 Iran War's missile chapter has now entered a new, more dangerous phase, one defined not by fantasy barrages of 5,000 rockets, but by the proven reality of sustained attritional strikes that test the outer limits of even the most sophisticated defenses. What this actually means is clear. Ballistic missiles have reasserted themselves as a credible tool of coercion in the hands of a determined state, even when that state's arsenal has been heavily degraded. Iran did not deliver a knockout blow, yet it forced Israel and its American partners to expend billions in interceptors, disrupt regional energy flows, and accept real, if limited, damage. That outcome alone has shifted the strategic balance in ways that will echo for years. The hidden implication is profound. Advanced missile shields work, until the political and economic cost of maintaining them becomes unsustainable. The Strait of Hormuz has reminded the world once again that geography and choke points still matter more than technology alone. Global energy markets, supply chains, and great power calculations have all been rewritten in the space of a few intense weeks. For the immediate future, the most likely path remains tense coexistence under a fraying ceasefire. Reconstitution on one side, replenishment and deterrence on the other. Yet the next spark, whether in the Gulf, along a proxy frontier, or through a misread radar track, could collapse that fragile equilibrium in hours. This changes everything for how we think about deterrence in the 21st century. Quantity still matters, cost imposition still works, and the price of miscalculation in the world's most volatile energy corridor has never been higher. The lesson for every capital watching from afar is simple. The era of unchallenged technological superiority in missile warfare is over. What remains is a far more complex, far more expensive, and far more dangerous balance. One that will define the security of the Middle East and the stability of global energy long after the last Emad has fallen. Thank you for watching. The story is far from over. Stay informed, because in this new strategic reality, the next chapter could arrive without warning.